Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders, viewable on YouTube and Oppenheim TV. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're chatting with leaders of some of America's most prominent children's museums in Houston, Miami, and Chicago. We have Rayanne Darensbourg, who is CEO of the Children's Museum of Houston, Deborah Spiegelman, CEO and Executive Director of the Children's Museum of Miami, and Jennifer Farrington, President and CEO of the Children's Museum of Chicago. And it's so great to have you all here. I'm so excited. First of all, children, right? The center of the world. This is the best conversation that we can have this morning to start off 2025. So thank you for joining us. And let's dive right into the purpose of children's museums. And it just strikes me that you have a lot of constituents to satisfy, right? First of all, the children have to be happy. They have to come in, they have to enjoy the experience, they have to want to come back. Then you have the parents, then you have the grandparents, but you also have school systems, you have teachers, you have even employers, right, who want to make sure that the community is a really hospitable place for families so that people will be attracted to the work in the region. So let's chat about those constituents. How do you keep them all happy? How do you ensure that what you are delivering connects with so many important people, starting with children? Rayanne, let's start with you in Houston. What is your answer? How do you keep so many different people with so many different needs smiling?
So here in Houston, we're in this constant mode of listening to our visitors and refining, making sure that we're clearly asking good questions. We're listening to what we're getting back in terms of their experiences, engagement, and then adding that into our cycle, our life cycle of becoming a better and better, stronger institution that serves families and children and school groups here in Houston.
But even the act of listening, Deborah, is different, right? When you're listening to a child, when you're interacting, you're communicating with a child, it's different than when you're communicating with a school superintendent. But the school superintendent is one of your constituents, isn't it?
He's a decision maker, and resources are tight, I think, in all of our communities. And the school system has to make decisions as to where they allocate the resources. So we make sure that our exhibits during our development and our programming is tied to the school standards of the state and the county. And again, we do a lot of surveying. We ask the teachers if we're meeting their educational objectives. We provide a pre-kit and a post-kit follow-up to make sure that we are meeting the needs. But at the same time, I think a very important word that we all use is play, because learning through play is so important. And if children are engaged, I think that's the first piece of the puzzle. The children have to be having a great experience, and then we can get on to asking the questions. And I think the engagement and observing what's taking place in the exhibits is very important.
So the engagement of children, the joy of children, right? But also the learning that ties to the curriculum. And Jennifer, you have programs, and I think you said before we started the broadcast that you have programs in 26 schools in addition to your museum. Talk a little bit about that, about how do you end up shaping in person at a museum experiences, but then exporting those experiences into the classroom.
So yes, thank you for bringing that up. We operate currently 25, soon to be 26 Curiosity classrooms in Chicago Public Schools. And it's important to note that they're physical spaces that take the learnings of our entire field and 42 years of running Chicago Children's Museum being in operation. How do we take what works in our museums and how do we help bring that, not just magic, but the science? We know what we're doing. We know how to get children really deeply engaged in learning on their own terms. And how do we bring those environments along with the necessary support, whether those are teacher trainings, whether those are direct interactions with children, bringing curricular supports to teachers. How do we bring those to life to make our entire educational system better? I think all of us would agree that we're not our goal isn't to make our respective museums the best they can be. Of course, that's very important. It's to make our cities great places to be children and places where children can thrive.
So when you're teaching something, let's take the concepts and the ideas of flight.
Mm-hmm.
We've all familiar with seeing airplanes, perhaps being on airplanes. We're familiar with some of the history, the Wright brothers, and the development of airplanes. They're fascinating. And then birds. How do you each talk about such a concept? And if it isn't flight, talk about a different concept. Jennifer, why don't you start, and then we'll go to Rayanne and Deborah. But how do you engage in a way that connects to the joy of the child to just play, right? That connects to a curriculum that creates this sense of a journey that has just begun. So it's not terminated with the first visit. The second visit, you can deepen that exploration. Jennifer, you want to give us your take on how you deliver that?
Yeah, I would love to, especially because we're currently hosting the Aim High exhibit, which is from our friends at the Pittsburgh Children's Museum. So we've been deeply immersed in that. I think the first element is to really broaden our idea of what is learning. It's not just about the facts of flight. It's not just about the science, but for very, very young children, it's about enjoying the exploration of, whether does that mean I want to be a plane? I want to be a butterfly? Does that mean I want to play with these objects and learn the words that are associated with them? A very important part of the Aim High exhibit is featuring the Tuskegee Airmen. So seeing imagery and internalizing that idea of who gets to fly, who gets to be a part of that. So it's much broader, it's much more holistic, and it's much more almost anti-disciplinary. It's as important for a young child to say, I'm flying, are you flying? I'm the pilot, or you're the passenger. You don't
predefine what success is, do you? Right? You're not setting children up to only succeed according to the definition of the adult, right?
For sure. Especially in the current world that we live in, there's a lot of ways to get facts and learn discrete skills. I think we're all very much about exposure, about exploration, and about that truly affective piece of helping young children see themselves as learners, to grow up believing that museums are places where we can belong and learn from and celebrate and have really great experiences with our families, our teachers, our classmates, people who are important to us. So I think it's our field has really matured to take a much broader and more confident view of how we present the idea of learning, capital L.
Rayanne, Deborah?
Yeah. And for us, we've really invested heavily on making sure we have full-time degreed educators in our gallery spaces. After COVID, we realized that we really needed to add that layer of expertise. And the reason why is that we wanted experts on the floor that could engage with children and families to help deepen their learning and exploration. So if there was something that was of interest to a child, there was someone there that was considered an expert who could help them. Maybe there's a question that they want to dig into a little bit deeper, or resources that parents want to explore at home. So having that investment for us was critical to our operations. I'd say the other part of it too is also digging into curiosities. Are we allowing and exposing children into a space and zone where they can explore what is meaningful and impactful and curious to them? And we've built our galleries around a quintessential childhood question. So for something like flight, we want kids to ask the questions, well, how does it work? Why does it work? And if we use that as our foundation, which we do, what we find is that we've opened the space, we haven't narrowed the space. We want to open that space as much as possible so kids and families could engage with and be a part of.
And flight is so interesting, right? Because you have fixed wings right? But then you also have flapping wings, right? And how does that work? I mean, a plane isn't flapping, right? Deborah, how do you deal with nuances of unpacking these different ideas that are embedded in something like flight or any other topic that you would choose? How do you ensure, Rayanne said we need to get educators. So, Mark might be a really wonderful guy, but he really doesn't understand pedagogy for children, right?
Well, I think it's important. I think we've all taken the leap of wanting children to have fun, but at the same time, providing them with a real learning experience. And so a child that's 3 will come in and they will succeed by handling, a plane in one way or putting together, we're Miami, so we have an exhibit that focuses on sailboats and the different, if you get into the very detailed aspects of how it works, a child's not necessarily going to understand that. But with a simple air jet and giving a child the mechanisms to put something together so they can be propelled by the gust of wind or air that comes that way, you have to take the learning to the level of a child and leave it open-ended so a child feels successful with their accomplishment. And a 3-year-old will succeed at one level, and a 5-year-old will succeed at the other level. And if you have an educator that's teaching the program and educating children on a holistic level about all of the components, the shape, the size, the color, then the child can take that information, process it, and succeed.
The thing that I find fascinating about your point that you just made is that it combines 2 elements or 3 elements. There's an idealistic and educator type element here. How do you educate? How do you connect with people of different ages? But there's also a real sharp business logic here. If you provide an experience that a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old and an 8-year-old, 9, 10-year-old can have, they're going to stay connected to your museum over a long period of time, right? And that ends up speaking to relevance. It ends up speaking with earned income, contributed income, doesn't it, Deborah? I mean, you're basically not only pursuing an educational mission, you're creating a business strategy as well.
Well, I think the business strategy in the museums is essential. Even though we're a not-for-profit institution, we have a responsibility to our stakeholders. Our stakeholders are the community. A private company would reinvest any type of profit. We reinvest that into the programs and furthering our development. And I think that museums today have had to get creative with what types of business models propel the success and provide opportunities for our institutions to grow. And I think Jennifer's example of how Chicago has taken their programming into the classrooms has answered a great question about the accessibility and making sure that with the limits on transportation or budget restraints, every child has the opportunity to be exposed to the great work and, the impact of learning through various meetings, not just a teacher standing up and lecturing. And I think the work that we're doing is super important in demonstrating and teacher training and providing the resources for future generations.
I love the point that you're making. What you're saying is, for example, logistics costs of bringing children into the museum, if you can bring the museum to children, right? Those dollars can be funding that export of knowledge and the distribution, so it's not so centralized, making it more accessible. It's also a business planning approach. Talk a little bit about, if you all could just jump in here, is one of the big issues that children museums have is that children, they touch everything. there's a lot of wear and tear in a children's museum, right? And everything has to be robust, has to be safe, no splinters, no, high falls or any of that. But you also have to constantly refresh. Could you talk a little bit about how you ensure that your exhibits first are built for that kind of pressure, human pressure, but also what kind of investments you need to make? Because your assets are depreciating just like that, aren't they?
They are. We're actually going through a campus planning, master planning process right now with a focus on our exhibits overhauling. For us, it's been a matter of prioritizing and then just being really forward thinking in prototyping. We have our own fabrication team on staff, and before we do a complete build out, we like to prototype. We put it through, I don't know if you remember this commercial back in the day, the luggage that would come down the rack and then the ape would jump on it to see if it would really withstand the pressure of travel. We've got to have a little bit of that in as part of our team mantra and thinking. We've got a pressure test. So we do quite a bit of prototyping and building, and so that we can refine it and it can be the best possible exhibitry components. You got to test it, and kids will let you know really quickly. You will find out really quickly as well. We also have a kids committee, Mark, so we use our kids in ways that help us build the best products possible. They're the ones that will tell us, is this engaging? Is it not? Because you need to be able to constantly grab the attention of families and children. My director of marketing says all the time, we're in competition with the sofa. That's our biggest competition, is really time for families to come out, leave out of bubbles and come into this space. So how do we make sure that we have the best exhibit that will last the longest as well? But we are dealing with a shelf life that we've, once we get to about 7 years, we know that there's time to remodel and enhance to the next as well.
And Jennifer, you have a considerable museum ecosystem in Chicago. You have the Field, you have the Art Institute, and there's so many other museums. The Wrights in Detroit. But there are a whole range of different museums that you're competing and interacting with. Does the museum ecosystem within Chicago affect the Shed, the aquarium, and so on? Does it affect how you actually operate? Or do you see yourself as if you were in a different city, you would operate pretty much the same way?
Yeah. No, I think we have to keep our environment in mind. And for that reason, I think we're probably a little more laser focused on early childhood. We know that people are going to the other organizations. Instead of thinking of them as competition, we think about when's the right time for children to graduate to them and what would success look like. And to me, success looks like a 6, 7, 8-year-old wanting to go to other museums and being sure that they're going to have an awesome experience because they love museums, because their exposure to Chicago Children's Museum has been so positive. So we are pretty focused on that. We also have changed the nature of our exhibits quite a bit, so that we have several exhibits that really operate as platforms. So you can come to the Tinkering Lab all the time, but there's always something different going on inside. The same
really interesting. Could you keep talking about that, the whole idea of a platform? And then if we could all jump in, because that is it's a relative, I mean, it's not completely new, but it's a relatively new concept, this idea of a platform versus an exhibit. What is the difference?
So we start by saying it doesn't have to be everything, but it kind of has to be able to be anything. It has to be developed, built, created as a space that can really host a wide variety of pursuits. And just like Rayanne talked about those quintessential childhood questions, we talk about our conceptual framework is around the universal pursuits of childhood. So if we know that children love to fool around, tinker, engineer, fix, break, try again. We have a whole space dedicated to that process. And from within that, we can ask a bunch of those essential questions. We can design different engineering challenges. So our regular visitor is going to know that when they come next month, there's going to be something else. They probably can also continue to work on whatever they were exploring or pursuing prior. But in terms of our art studio, our tinkering lab, our early childhood space, other spaces in the museum, we really focus on that element. It means a shift from the upfront costs of quite as much fabrication, and means an ongoing commitment to investing in staff and investing in program materials. So we still put together an exhibit team for our tinkering lab, because when we decide that what we're going to engineer next is a party hat that has to stay on your head while you're dancing, we might need a disco ball, some lights, and music in the space. So we still need our exhibits team to support us with that. When we're going to be creating a challenge that's about creating a vehicle that will go a certain distance, we may work together to create, ramps with measurement elements on the side. So it's just a different way.
Deborah, do you have maker spaces in Miami as well?
We do. We have a whole art lab where we have a devoted educator that's in there, and the projects change on a monthly and a weekly basis. We also have a glass lab where children can create a piece of glass to take home with them, and they can observe the sandblasting and participate in creating and understanding how there's positive and negative space.
And that brings you to this whole idea of what is the cost of a particular space, what is the cost of the machines and the maintaining of the machines. You then have to develop contracts, right? You have to ensure that it is sustainably funded, right, Rayanne? I mean, there's a lot of business education required here.
Yeah, I mean, on our end, we live in Houston. We have a lot of corporations that are very vested in building a future workforce, and we've been able to really leverage that in really good, solid sponsorship and partnerships in our museum. We do have a makerspace as well that is underwritten by Chevron, and they're interested in having future employees of Chevron who come with the skills and and the curiosity that we're building on right now. And that's just part of the world we're in. We've got to invest in the ability to earned revenue, as you said, Mark, but also in our contributed income. How do we continue to build our friends and supporters that understand the value of the children's museums and investing in them, not just for their children, but for children of the city that you're in, for Houston's children, we always say. You don't have to have just young children to care about children's museums. You have to care about the children of Houston and care about your future workforce and citizens in the community. And no one disputes that. That is something we can all agree and care about, which gives us a strong leverage for engaging as many supporters as possible.
We're coming to the end of our time. I would like to turn our attention to this question of how children's museums serve these diverse interests in a community, right? We in Miami or in Houston or in Chicago, we have totally different cities with totally different ethnic makeups, backgrounds, histories. You have, Chicago being in the Midwest, you have Miami being on the coast, Houston, in Texas, totally different economies. How do you look at this whole idea of getting everybody engaged and meeting people where they live, right? So you have different communities. You have in Miami, you have a huge Cuban population. You don't have a huge Cuban population in Houston, right? Chicago has its own ethnic mixes. How do you ensure that people come into your museum and just feel that it's their museum? How do you do that, Rayanne? You want to give it a shot, and then Jennifer, and
Absolutely. I mean, we do it in two ways. We have one of the most robust free programming in Houston. We serve over 200,000 families and children annually with our outreach programming in a multiple of languages and with a multiple community partners, where we're able to meet families where they are. But in addition to that, we always ensure to distribute our free admission tickets so that families who would not traditionally have access to museums here in Houston or access to resources to visit our museum are able to come here, no questions asked. It's a huge part of our mission, our mantra of how we approach the work we do. 30 to 40% of our visitorship comes through the museum via our free programming. We want to make sure that access is at the forefront. In addition to our exhibits in multiple languages, our staff represents the diversity of Houston. Houston is one of the most diverse cities in the country. So we wear name tags if we speak multiple languages. We say hello in those languages. Any of the programming that we develop with our on-site library, we have a Houston Public Library on site. We make sure that our book offerings and our family engagement kits are in multiple languages. We want to meet families where they are, but we also are learning as well. We see families as part of our ecosystem of how we can be stronger in serving the community.
well, that's no different than an airline, right? If you're flying over to Japan, you want to have people on the airplane who speak Japanese, right? Because some of your patrons are going to be Japanese, and some of them are going to have different language speakers, right? I mean, all you're doing is serving your patrons. Jennifer, how do you ensure that your institution is viewed by the entire community as being theirs?
So I'll go in reverse order and start with when people show up. I totally agree. Having a diverse staff who can welcome folks, that means we have a special responsibility to hire more men in our organizations, because early childhood is thought of as so female, the workforce is dominated. But so when we did a study and we said, how can we do better? We heard, we want to see more men who work there. I don't feel very comfortable coming if I'm a dad, if I'm a young
Hear
dad.
that, guys? Hear that?
Yes.
We have to step up. Okay, we have to step up.
So having a staff that really represents our whole audience, same with language, the same with pins, making it visible, making sure those buttons are big enough, making sure that you have a bilingual, trilingual, multilingual exhibit policy that will outlast you. When Jennifer Farrington goes and decides she's going to do something else, I want to make sure that these things have been codified and ratified and adopted by our board, so that our commitment to being a welcoming organization is really woven into the fabric of our organization. And then I think it's the partnerships. How do you show up for your partners, show up for your communities, not being flighty about who you partner with, but really think about your resource and say, are we going to be able to sustain this for how many years? When we go in for a grant, we're not going to write a grant and then say, hey, we got this grant, you want to do this thing? We say, who wants to come to the table? Let's go for this together. Let's be a part of this. So bringing community organizations, university partnerships together when you go for an NSF grant or IMLS grant. So you're really all deeply invested and making those investments year over year.
And Deborah, before we started recording, you made a great point. You said in today's world, we need to come together, and children are the way to bring people together. Talk a little bit about how that piece of what you do is part of your strategy for ensuring that everybody feels that this children's museum in Miami is their children's museum.
Well, we have a huge commitment to multicultural programming. One of the strands of who we are is the culture, because we have so many different languages. We've taken a different approach. We don't have signage in the museum. We're committed to more intuitive or Reggio-inspired learning, where an experience is self-directed, because we ran into so many challenges because Spanish, 63% of our population is Hispanic, but Hispanic has so many different strands. A Venezuelan or a Cuban or someone from another country has a different dialect, and someone from Spain will pronounce differently. So that was something when we went with bilingual signage we found was, something we needed to move from. We also have a very diverse team. And when I talk about a diverse team, we are committed to providing programming for children that are neurodiverse and who learn differently. We have 8 members of our staff who have a form of neurodiversity. It's a big commitment that we have made. And it's wonderful because we empower people with different learning styles to be on the floor and to relate, because a family that comes in with a child with a diagnosis wants to feel comfortable as well. And that's a big part of who we are. We also do a program called Representation Through the Artist's Lens, where we bring in artists from different cultural backgrounds because we want every child to be inspired to believe that they can be or do anything that they want to do. Going back to my mantra of, if we value respect and kindness in our museum, and if we demonstrate that to our visitors, I think that's an area that we can hopefully model the behavior and build a better society for the years to come.
Well, that's something that we all need to think about over these next years and going into the future, building a better society. We're all involved. Rayanne Darensbourg, CEO of the Children's Museum of Houston, Deborah Spiegelman, CEO and Executive Director of the Children's Museum of Miami, and Jennifer Farrington, President and CEO of the Children's Museum of Chicago. Thank you so much for sharing this work and modeling how we should all actually function. We should think about triangulating amongst audiences. We should think about the young and the older. We should think about the businesses and the little kids and their parents and the teachers and the school districts. We should, if we all thought about this, wouldn't the country be better? So let's go forward, right? Be inspired by you and make this future what it should be for our kids. Thank you so much for your insights. It's just great to have you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.